Hey guys, this is Salty. Today I will be going through each melee DPS specialization and ranking them according to how difficult they will be to play in the upcoming expansion, The War Within. Okay, let's dive straight into it then, shall we? First up, let's talk about Feral Druid. This centers around managing dual resources of energy and combo points in a build and spend system to apply powerful dot effects. Resource mismanagement can be extremely punishing for Feral. Has strong single target damage with strong sustained AoE but limited burst. Feral has a decent amount of abilities you need to be routinely activating. The builds and rotations are reasonably straightforward, but there can be a lot to keep track of, so you will need weak auras or timers to really maximize your damage output. This is not a spec where you can just start smashing buttons and expect to do well. Not the hardest and not the easiest. Probably would not suggest Feral Druid for newer players. I'm going to place Feral in the middle of the pack here in the B tier. Okay, let's take a look at Arms Warrior. A fairly straightforward damage dealer. Rotations revolve around using frequent short cooldown burst windows with Colossus Smash. Has great mobility thanks to Charge, Intervene and Heroic Leap. Provides the very desirable attack power buff Battle Shout. For single target and AoE, there are a reasonable number of abilities you need to use, but the rotations feel intuitive to play. This is not a challenging specialization to learn, and I feel like even completely new players would be able to pick this up pretty easily. Not the easiest melee DPS specialization, but it's really close in my opinion. I'll be dropping Arms into the A tier, and while we're talking about Warrior, we may as well cover Fury. Arguably the easier of the Warrior DPS specializations, Fury centers around a very fast and direct playstyle that revolves around generating rage and spending it on Rampage in order to maintain Enrage. Again, excellent mobility thanks to Charge, Intervene and Heroic Leap, as well as a high number of defensive abilities. As with Arms, Fury Warriors bring Battle Shout to the table, has an extremely easy, albeit fast rotation with only a few abilities to focus on for both single target and AoE. This is hands down one of the easiest melee DPS specializations in the game. If you like smashing buttons without having to think too hard about what you are doing, then you should really consider Fury Warrior, especially if you are a new player. I'm going to place Fury directly into the S tier, extremely easy to play. Okay, let's take a look at the first of the Rogue specializations on our list, Subtlety. Rotations revolve around maximizing burst damage windows by combining Shadow Dance, Shadow Blades, and Symbols of Death. Outside of these cooldowns, Subtlety Rogue damage can really suffer. This can make them difficult to pug Mythic Plus keys with, since you will never know when your tank is going to make a big pull. Probably the least forgiving of the Rogue specializations, has a very weak low target cleave. Has excellent defensive and utility abilities, but the offensive rotations can be confusing given the different abilities and the order in which they need to be used. This is not a specialization I would suggest for newer players. I'm going to place Subtlety Rogue in the D tier in the extremely difficult bracket. Let's keep going with Rogue and look at Outlaw next. Outlaw Rogue is a jack of all trades specialization and can typically handle any given scenario with its toolkit. Its highly reactive gameplay means you'll always need to be watching what is happening as opposed to following a linear rotation. Exceptional survivability thanks to their range of defensive abilities with excellent group utility for Mythic Plus. There are a lot of abilities to be aware of, and they typically need to be used at the exact right moment with the exact amount of combo points for you to maximize your damage. It can be a lot to keep track of, and unless you're already super familiar with Outlaw Rogue, it will not be a smooth initiation to playing Rogue. Again, would probably not recommend for newer players. This one is going to the D tier with Subtlety, just a very difficult spec to pick up in its current form. And let's wrap up Rogue now by looking at their final spec, Assassination. Similar to Feral Druid, Assassination centers around a dot application playstyle, has very powerful 2-minute burst window, excellent survivability and utility. Has a particularly long-winded single target opening sequence at around 15 seconds long by the time you get everything rolling. As with the other two Rogue specializations, there are a lot of different abilities to keep track of, and this will be overwhelming for newer players. Assassination, however, does feel more forgiving than Subtlety and Outlaw, but it's still quite complicated to learn. Not the hardest spec in the game. I feel comfortable placing Assassination into the C tier. Hard enough, but the easiest Rogue spec to play currently in The War Within. Okay, let's move on and take a look at Retribution Paladin. Straight off the bat, Ret is one of, if not the easiest melee DPS specs in the game. It does have a relatively low skill ceiling where making the effort to improve beyond the basics is not rewarded as much as others. Subsequently, this may be one of the best DPS specs for new players from both the ranged and melee DPS pools. Has amazing defensive cooldowns, auras and utility. Rotations for single target and AoE are extremely easy with only a few abilities to focus on for each. You can do huge amounts of damage with very little effort. It's super chill to play. This one is going straight to the S tier. Easiest spec in the game. Okay, let's do Enhancement Shaman now. Enhanced gameplay centers around juggling different ability cooldowns, managing your stacks of Maelstrom weapon effect, and reacting to procs. Works on a priority ability system. Has a variety of damage profiles with short cooldown timers and powerful single target potential. Will require a lot of tab targeting and weaving, strong 2 to 6 target cleave and AoE, but Enhanced has an extremely punishing playstyle with a very steep learning curve and requires a large number of keybinds to play effectively. There is just a whole lot going on, and you'll need to be constantly aware of what you're doing at all times to maximize your damage output. This one is really challenging to pick up. New players will not enjoy learning to play Enhance. I would probably only suggest this for veteran players personally. I feel comfortable placing Enhance into the very hard bracket, so I'm going to drop it into the D tier, very difficult. Okay, and moving right along, let's talk about Frost DK. Has high burst and cleave potential, but limited mobility and utility. Has a lower number of abilities that need to be used for single target and AoE, making it extremely beginner friendly. Easy to understand and intuitive rotations that I feel even newer players should be able to pick up very quickly. Very tanky for a DPS spec, so decent survivability in there as well. There's not much more to say about Frost Death Knight. In terms of difficulty, it's arguably just slightly more complicated than Retribution Paladin, but not by much. Going to whack this straight into S tier. New players and veterans looking for a chill melee class to play will love Frost DK. And let's do Unholy Death Knight while we're at it. One of the tankiest DPS specializations in the game, Unholy DK has great single target and burst AoE potential, but again, limited mobility and utility. Is this a difficult cast to play? Well, yes, it certainly can be. The rotation centers around spreading disease and works on a priority system. Given a large number of different factors, it will determine what ability you're using at any given moment, or even what combination of abilities you will need to use. To play properly, Unholy will take a lot of practice and has a larger than average number of abilities you will need to keybind and routinely activate in order to be effective. This is not a spec for new players. It can be extremely punishing. Not as hard as some, but I'm going to place this into the C tier. A hard spec to pick up and master. Okay, let's take a look at Windwalker Monk now. Intuitive to play with high mobility, strong burst, sustained AoE and cleave. With the War Within overhaul, Windwalker is still quite a complex specialization to pick up and to do well with. Has a rigid opening for both single target and AoE rotations with a larger than average number of abilities to use, making it not particularly beginner friendly. Depending on the build, the rotations can be quite complex. Not the hardest melee DPS spec in the game, but it's definitely hard, so I'll be placing Windwalker into the C tier. Not recommended for super new players. Okay, and we've got 2 more to go. Let's do Havoc Demon Hunter now. Has a build and spend resource management system, has strong burst across single target and AoE, although your AoE is tied to cooldowns, which requires planning, making it not an ideal candidate for pugging Mythic Plus, where your large AoE windows will vary. Very fast-paced style of gameplay, strong passive and active defensive, high mobility, and good group utility. There are a number of different talent builds you can utilize, and each of these has a large number of abilities you will need to have keybound, along with pretty challenging rotations that you will need to master. Again, probably not for super new players. Not the hardest melee spec by any means, but not the easiest either. I feel comfortable placing Havoc DH into the C tier. Pretty hard. Okay, and finally, let's take a look at Survival Hunter. So recently reworked for the War Within, has powerful single target and AoE options, and often within the same build. Good self-sustain, but poor utility and low burst damage. Has a number of different talent builds depending on playstyle, but each of these can be very complex to master given the large number of abilities you will need to learn to perform well in raids and Mythic Plus. It's one of those specs, it can be easy to pick up with certain builds, but then really difficult to master with others. Your AoE rotations can become incredibly technical with weaving and different abilities. I was not quite sure where to place Survival in my tier list, but it really doesn't feel right sitting in the hardest bracket with Enhancement and Subtlety. I feel comfortable placing Survival into the C bracket. It's hard, but not the hardest. And that's it, guys. Thanks for checking out the video, and please do let me know what you think in the comments below. As always, I'm Salty, and I will catch you next time. Cheers.